I'd be delighted to. So here's what I thought I would do today. You can tell me if you think that this would be what you're looking for or helpful. I thought I'd give you kind of an overview on what the book's done since it came out. And then I thought I'd take you through kind of a summary of the book from the standpoint of the business challenges that owners face in planning for succession and exit. And so that's what I had in mind. Does that work? Would you rather hear something different? Okay. And I'll invite you anytime to stop me and ask questions, because I'll be running through, but I'm happy to entertain any questions along the way or comments or stuff like that. And we can go from there. So works? Okay. So I'll give you first an update on how the book is done. I'm super excited about it. When the book came out, it hit #1 new release on Amazon in the category of business consolidations and mergers. And soon after that, it hit in the top 5 bestsellers in that same category. So it's got some really nice traction on Amazon. If you went to my Amazon book page for the book, you would see that I've got 41 reviews. And fortunately, fortunately, they're all 5 stars, which is exciting because I've been asking for reviews, and I'd welcome reviews from anybody who has not already posted one. I know several of you have already. Thank you. Yes?
Can I ask a question? Where do I go to get that link? Because I'll put it in the chat for any of us who have not done that. They could do it while you're talking, even in some part of this. Where do I just go to the book, the same place it was before, and look it up on Amazon and just put that link in there, and they can add the link, add the thing now if they want to, right?
Yeah, all you have to do is scroll down on the book page where it gives the testimonials and it says write a review, and you just click on that, and anyone can write one. I think as long as you've spent $50 on Amazon in the last year, they'll accept your review.
I'll put it out there.
Thank you. So it's doing great there. I've also had a couple of other exciting things happen. I was invited to present at the Exit Planning Summit, which is in Marco Island, Florida, in late April. And I know several of the Stearns folks are SEPA certified. So if you're going to be attending that summit, you'll have a chance to hear me in a breakout session. And then I've also been invited to speak at Penn State University's inaugural Family Business Center Family Business Summit. And that's in the middle of May. And that came out of my author showcase for my Straight Talk book, which I've recovered, but it's the, you may recognize this cover, but I recovered it to this cover. And when I was at the Exit Planning Summit last year in Scottsdale, and I met the guy that's running the Penn State conference. And so he invited me to present at that. So that's exciting. And I know several of you were at my book launch party, which was wonderful. We had about 160 people there, had 180 RSVPs, yes. And I know at least several in this group had to cancel last minute because of unfortunate illness. But that was a really fun event too. So that was kind of like my kickoff. And you were talking about your Ninja book kickoff as well, Dennis. So anyway, that's kind of an update on the book. I've probably distributed collectively about 350 copies so far. Some of those are through the book launch party. Some are through a program that I did for Wake Forest University's their Center for Private Business, where I was the MC at Biscuitville. I know Jed was there. And then also I have done 1 or 2 other programs. And then of course, book sales on Amazon. So I counted that in that number. So that's what the book has done so far. Now you're probably sitting at the edge of your seat thinking, but what's it about, Abby? So I will share that with you. I've got a number of different challenges that I'm going to talk through that are covered in the book. So I'm not going to go through chapter by chapter or principle by principle, but I'm going to kind of take a step back and look at it a little bit more broadly and know that all of this is incorporated into the book and then some, because I'm not going to cover every single thing in the book in the time that we have. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the challenges I see from my lens. And again, my book is the non-financial side. So I know many of the folks in this group are deep into the financials and provide really important value to owners on that aspect of their either their sale of the business or their succession and planning. But mine is all on the non-financial. So I talk about leadership, I talk about strategy, I talk about the people pieces, the interpersonal dynamics and the family dynamics, and how do you have those difficult conversations. So that's kind of the meat of the book. So the first challenge that I see that I know is probably a factor for any of you that are working with business owners in this stage of their business and life is it's really hard to get them into action on this. It is so easy to put off. I use a phrase that Patrick Ungashik, who's an advisor in Atlanta, coined called the rolling 10. And it's like every time you talk to an owner, you say, hey, when are you planning to exit your business? They say, 5 to 10 years. And then you see them again in 3 or 4 years and you say, so when are you planning on exiting their business? 5 to 10 years. And so it's always something further along. And of course, you all know that fortunately, we're living longer and healthier lives. And so there's not really a driver for owners to make something happen until there is. And so the issue oftentimes will come down to their identity is in the business, and this process is really emotional. And so it's difficult for them to step away from it. It requires a change. Change can be hard. And it's uncertain. There's no clear path on how to do this well. There are certainly some principles that I have and each of you in your business have to help them along on this. But, there's a lot of uncertainty about how it's going to work out. And sometimes these transitions can be messy, even if they're going well, because of all the emotion that's in there. So sometimes people, owners don't start doing this until there's a triggering incident. And the triggering incident can be anything from, death, divorce, a health issue. It could be prodding from their adult children. It could be prodding from their spouse. Or it could be that they're seeing all their friends moving on and they're starting to think, well, maybe I should do something different. It could be that they want to take some risk off the table. They've got so much invested in the business and they need some of that money for their retirement. And so they want to step away for that. So, as you all know, there's a whole host of reasons why they can put it off. But if they don't take action on it, then, the risk to how well it's going to go will continue to increase. So,
hey, Abby, can I ask a question about that?
Sure.
When you're in your consulting role, how do you thread the needle between, hey, I think this person probably could use a little prodding right now versus just sort of letting the process naturally unfold? How hard do you push it, or is that all just an individual decision with each individual client? Because I imagine you must have some clients where you're going, ooh, I can see some bad stuff happening for them here if they don't start planning this pretty darn soon. It's not one of these ones, well, they could probably let it slide, no big deal. Other ones, you let it slide, where this market is going, you might be in trouble. How do you handle those kinds of issues when you got a client who doesn't want to look at it and you think they should?
Yeah, I think it varies, and I'll answer it 2 ways. If I've got a client that I've been working with for some period of time and they don't want to deal with it, then I will push a bit to try to bring it to their attention, and I'll continue to bring it up in meetings. I'll try to assign them a homework that I'll ask them to do that will help them to start to think through that and move towards it and recognize the value of it. So that's the one answer is yes, that in those cases I will push and encourage and negotiate and that kind of thing. But for me, a lot of times I don't do anything with prospects because they're not coming to meet with me if they don't already feel like there's some value in it. So I'm not going out there and hunting people down and pushing or anything like that. If they're not already a client, most of them are coming to me because they're at least ready to have the conversation. They may not be ready to take action or hire me, but they're at least ready to entertain the conversation.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that? What in your experience do you see that we other financial advisors could do to help that process along? Are there things that we can do to, if they're not, they're not moving forward, are there things that we could do to help in that convincing, so to speak?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Keith. Jed, did you want to answer that?
You answer it, of course. And then if you want something to build on, I'll build on.
Okay. Well, and you're welcome to. It should be a discussion. I think that for me, the things that wealth advisor, CPA, an attorney can do is ask the questions that are in your wheelhouse around that highlight the importance of it. So asking, I could see Dennis or Paula asking questions about, you've got all of your wealth tied up in this business and, you're 75 years old. And as you look at how you want to proceed over the next 15, 20 years of your life, would it make sense to start to look at taking some of that risk off the table? Or, for you, Keith, you might be asking about, some of the tax advantage ways that they may want to think about it, or some of the same kind of questions, but through the lens of a CPA. So that's really what I think other disciplines can do to kind of facilitate that thinking. Jed, what were you going to add?
No, I think your answer is perfect, Abby.
Okay. That's so unusual.
You're welcome.
All right. So the biggest piece coming out of getting owners into action, I think, is the recognition that this process is really emotional, and doing something different requires a change, and getting their identity, recognizing their identity is in the business. The second piece, the second challenge that I see is most owners don't spend any time really figuring out what matters most to them. And they may spend some time figuring out how much money they need. And they get help from, Dennis and Paula to go through that process. And, maybe they'll get some help also from some of the others of you on that. But I find that that's as far as they often go. And they need to put some attention to that in far more depth. So if they're planning on selling to a third party, then they may be looking at what that payout's going to be, and they may get excited about the idea of being able to step away with or without an earnout, ideally without an earnout. But if they're selling to a family member or a key employee, then the kinds of things that often matter most to them, well, actually, they matter most whether they're selling to a key employee or a third party or a family member, is the importance of maintaining their culture, the importance and the opportunity to stay in a role, not the role, but in a role that's well defined, where they can continue to contribute to the success of the business. They can continue maybe to mentor the new owner and leader of the company. They may be giving up some immediate payment for the potential of payment over time, hopefully, because that new owner will be able to pay out what they commit to. But they also have the opportunity to leave a legacy. And so having them think through those things really matters. In fact, yesterday, 2 days ago, I was meeting with a person that's not a client of mine, but came to me for some advice. And what was really interesting is that he was debating between a very small, his fee is, his company is a service company. And so the fee he was going to charge to sell his business to his successor, which is not a family member, it's a key employee, was actually quite small in the grand scheme of things. But he said, if over 3 years he can't afford or won't afford to pay me out this, modest amount, I could sell it to a company in Winston that wants to expand into Greensboro. I could sell it to somebody else and probably make a little bit more money. And I really challenged him on that, because when I listened to him talk about his key employee, he adores this guy. He's developed this guy. This guy is running the business essentially today, doing a fantastic job. And so my challenge to him is, what matters most? Would you rather sell the company for a modest amount more to someone you don't know today, or only, sort of peripherally? Or would you rather sell it for a little bit less, not nothing, but a little bit less to someone that, is going to be your legacy? And he looked at me and he said, wow, that's a really good point. Because he was so emotionally involved in the things that we usually think are important. But once if he went down the path of selling it to a third party, I'm fairly certain he would be regretful of that. So a lot of the focus in a couple of chapters of the book is to help owners figure out what really matters most. And most of the people that I work, they do want to roll in the company moving on, but not under private equity, typically not an earnout. They do want to make sure that their culture is maintained. They do want to make sure that they get a fair price for it, but it doesn't have to be the best price ever. And they want to have some transition to create a new identity in their next chapter. And so I talk about that later, and I'll get to that shortly. But the figuring out what matters most is a big piece of it. The third,
Abby, can I add one thing to that?
oh,
If you also sell to an insider, the legal process can be cheaper because there's less negotiation and there's less risk in the purchase agreement because you don't have to make the same reps and warranties or indemnities or all that stuff. And so there can be some cost savings and less angst in the process as well.
That's a great point, John. You're absolutely right. I don't think that most people factor in the cost of selling to a third party. But most of the people that I'm working with are selling it internally anyway, so we're not really often getting into that comparison decision. Although occasionally, as Jed knows, I've had clients who thought they were going to sell to an inside, a key employee or a family member, and either they didn't want it or the people they were going to sell it to were not capable of running it.
Well, so Abby, I got a question for you from that comment. Are owners somehow self-selecting that you're getting more of the people who are selling internally versus externally?
I think so.
To you.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
why would that be?
Well, I think the only reason that they think they're going to come to me, because I don't do any of the, the brokering of the business. I don't do any of the legal. I don't do any of the financial. I don't do any of the, lining them up like Jed does with, the right buyer for the company. So if they're coming to me, they're pretty much going down the path of, I want to make this work internally. I want to do it right. I want to set my successor up for success. And the only time that I get involved otherwise is if they find me and either it doesn't work, so they have to sell to a third party, or they decide to sell to a third party for their own reasons, or sometimes I'm involved helping support them think through it. So like a couple of examples where Jed and I have had the privilege of working together, where I brought Jed into the situation, was when they really wanted an objective sounding board to kind of manage their emotions through the process, because they, as Jed can attest to far better than me, because he's done a zillion of these and I've been involved in 2. The process can be extremely emotional and demanding on them, as you all know better than me. And so they want somebody that can be that objective third party that's there for their purposes to help keep them on track. And, I think Jed can attest that there have been a few times in the ones that I've been involved in where, there's a story in my book about somebody that was ready to walk away from the deal. I mean, it was a good deal. And they were just ready to walk away because they were fed up. And they came into my office and they're like, oh my gosh, I don't think I can do this. And it's like, all right, well, let's talk, let's work through it. And by the end of the meeting, it's like, all right, I'm in.
So multi-generational family businesses are your sweet spot. Is that fair?
I don't actually I think that's too limiting, because believe it or not, I have just as many that are key employee successions, and there's no family member involved. It's not multi-generational. So I would say it's probably split 50-50.
Okay. Good.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm curious about something. It just kind of occurs to me. I'm not sure it's that prominent, but have you ever been asked to get involved in a business, whether it's family or not, where the owner doesn't recognize necessarily that it's time, but someone else in the organization really does, and they're really like, we really got to get this guy on the same page because, this is not going to work out well. I mean, have you ever been involved in a situation like that?
Yeah, there's many times actually. There have been a handful of cases in the last probably 3 years that have been fascinating because there's been a transition where the successor has pulled me in, and the successor has felt so strongly about the need for someone like me to get involved in the business because of exactly that. The owner isn't doing the planning, or they're very intermittent in their planning, and they just see time passing and no progress happening. In other cases, the successor sees that the owner is really not positioning the business well for the succession to happen. They don't have any other, meaning in their life besides the business. And so they're worried about them, even though they've taken over, the successor is already running the company, but they're worried that their, either parent or owner is not going to stay healthy or things like that. So I do get involved in that a lot.
Yeah, fascinating. Thanks.
Yeah, it is. And usually in those cases, the owner is willing to entertain a conversation with me. And in more cases than not, they've been willing to bring me in and hire me, because I'm not only going to be working with the owner, I've got to be working with the successor as well. And sometimes even more broadly than that.
Right. Yeah.
All right. So the next challenge I was going to share with you from the book is around selecting and preparing the leadership and ensuring the business continuity long term. And so sometimes the selection of a successor is obvious. I mean, they have the right person. It could be a family member, a key employee, and they know who it is. And that person, that successor, knows who they are as well. So that process is pretty easy and straightforward. Sometimes, like I've worked with a company, I'm still working with them, going on 5.5 years now. And they did not know which of the 2 or 3 candidates were actually going to be the new president of the company. And so we ended up working a parallel path, developing all of them and allowing for, that development process to unfold and deliver who the right successor would be. And it did. Sometimes they have someone in mind, and through the work that we're doing, it becomes clear that they're not the right person. Sometimes it takes longer to get them to be the right person. And so what I cover in the book is thinking through how do you confirm who the right person is. And then once you have clarity on either the right candidate or several candidates, what's the development process to get them there? And so I introduce a concept around what do they have to do to prove to the owner that they're capable and ready to take over and run at least the day-to-day business, if not the long-term business. And the easy mechanism that I put in the book is, what do they have to know? What do they have to show? What do they have to do, be able to do? And then what do they have to deliver in terms of results? And I work with the owner to help them get clarity on, what are the answers to those questions? Because what has happened, if they don't get clarity on that, is either they don't do intentional development. And so they develop by saying, hey, just work in the business for a while and pay attention and watch me. And that doesn't really work most of the time. And, or if they don't do that, then what they'll end up doing is they'll say, well, you're doing pretty well. You're making good progress. And then the successor will feel like, all right, I'm on the path. This is probably another 6 months until I can take over, or until I've proven myself. And then the owner moves the goalpost and moves the goalpost and moves the goalpost. And so the successor is just tearing their hair out saying, when is it going to be enough? When am I going to have proven that I am capable? And especially in family member successions, you know, the adult child is feeling like, oh my gosh, my parents are never going to feel like I have proven enough. And so if we can identify what those things are, and it's not to say they don't change. I mean, the business could change and there might be nuances that need to get ironed out, but at least we can get some clarity and an intentional development plan in place. And we can work against that. So I'm busy working with the successor to develop them. I'm working with the owner to help them develop them and to help them see what the successor is actually doing or not doing, as the case may be, so that they're building that confidence. And then below that is the whole daisy chain. I had a situation recently where we did a really nice job of working on developing the leadership team, you know, the successor and that team. And what the owner recognized is that the bench strength deeper in the organization just wasn't enough. And so we had to quickly get on that level and started to develop that group. I call it the daisy chain. You know, you got to develop that next level. And go ahead, Dennis.
Yeah, so Abby, are you doing all this development work?
Yes.
Okay, because you know, that has in the Ninja research, the 4 key areas, leadership turned out to be one of them, but it was absolutely not what I thought it was going to be for leadership. It was, we got a whole new world out there. We got to see around corners. We got to do things kind of old school and new school combined. And so Kurt and I have been talking about, okay, how can we add more leadership development resources? But you don't hold yourself out to do that individually, right? You only do it as part of your overall process.
No, I'm doing it individually as well. I mean, probably, okay. Yeah. And actually, to your point, that's such an important point that you bring up, because the other piece that I include in the book is around strategic planning. And there's been this really interesting tension. I'm sure you saw it in the research that you were doing for your book, and in the conversations you and Kerr are having. You're probably seeing the same thing. There's this really interesting tension because the owners want to build a strategic plan that's kind of consistent with their approach to the business all along. And some of those owners are really innovative and creative and they're cutting edge kind of stuff. But sometimes you've got successors that want to be anticipating where the business needs to be going in the future, and they want to innovate and be more strategic and creative and, you know, do some things. And so there's tension around, one, can you get them both on board on the same plan, aligned to that? And two, how are you going to fund it? Because the funding often has to come from the owner, who is also funding the buyout from his or her successor. And so that dynamic, you know, there's one of my favorite lines in the book is about, you know, the successor has this, I don't remember it exactly, but it's something like the successor has this really exciting strategic plan, and it might be a really viable plan, and the owner might even get excited about what the potential might be, but they want to fund it using your money. So
that sounds painfully similar to one of the things that Dennis and I are involved in now.
Yep.
I'll just say that. Yeah, definitely.
Yep. And I mean, I've had a situation with a client that, you know, Gary Fly isn't here, but I know he's working with the client right now, which is essentially, that's the story in the book, is, you know, one of those clients. And it was a really healthy, good, productive discussion. But in the book, I talk about, you know, some ways of mitigating that so that both parties' needs can get met, because the answer isn't don't do the new strategic plan. And the answer isn't, you know, fund the successor's big dreams. You've got to figure out how to make it work between the two. So Yeah, it's fun and exciting. So I do get involved in doing strategic planning often with clients. I do those as individual and one-offs as well. But in a client situation, I'm often helping them with a strategic plan because they've got to gain alignment to it. So
Yeah. So Abby, thanks. It's helpful to know that you are a resource for that leadership development piece.
yeah, that's probably the one of the biggest components of my work. I probably do more of that work than anything else. You know, people tend to index me into the next chapter thing, and I do some of that. But I would say that I probably, for every next chapter client I probably have 5 to 10 leadership development clients. So that's the majority of the business, both from a number of clients and a revenue standpoint.
Yep.
So that's the fourth piece. The fifth piece that I wanted to talk about in the book is all about the next chapter kind of thing. And what I talk about as a challenge is overcoming the owner's resistance and helping the owner get ready. So owner readiness is a key piece of this. And one of the chapters in the book is basically that retirement is outdated. You know, people aren't retiring in the traditional way as much anymore. And part of it's because they're living longer, healthier lives. Part of it is because the clients that I'm working with tend to have resources available to them. And so they don't have to keep working to put food on the table. And they like what they do. I mean, they built a business that they're proud of and they're excited about it. And so why should they leave? And one of the biggest challenges I see in that in the next phase of that process is they don't want to be pushed out of their business. And so they can get super sensitive to the idea that somebody's trying to push them out. And I'm always super clear with them that nobody's going to, you know, my job is not to push you out of the business. You don't hire me to help you get out unless you want to get out. What you hire me to do in that regard is you hire me to help you figure out what is your portfolio life plan. Because, you know, if you want to make a transition, it may include the business, it may not. And so the idea is that you figure out what role you can play in the business. And is there a meaningful role? Because if there isn't, then, you know, we have a different conversation. But is there a meaningful role that you can play in the business? And can you define it enough so that the successor values it and wants you there in that role? And you're able to stay in your lane. You know, I've been working with a client for the last 6 months who, you know, they've been working on succession for a long time. They brought me in 6 months ago because they were stuck. I mean, they had gotten messy and ugly. They probably should have brought me in a few years ago. But you know, the owner said, I want a defined role in the company. And her successor, happens to be daughter, said, well, you know, I'm fine with you playing this role. In fact, I value you playing this role, but you have to stay in your lane in this role because you start, you know, getting involved in all other parts of the business. And it's confusing to the organization. It's a different direction that I'm trying to take the company. And so we've had multiple conversations about how do we help her stay in her lane. And she's just finding it really difficult to do that, even though she absolutely 100% says she wants to do it. So those kinds of things can be particularly challenging. And that's when she'll feel like she's being pushed out because she doesn't stay in her lane. She gets pressure to stay in her lane, and then she feels like she's being pushed out. So what I am often doing in that situation is working through not only helping them define the role, and again, it gets back to what matters most. And so if we can go back to what matters most, then we can help them figure out what that portfolio life plan is. And so the last chapter in the book is called Leaning into Your Portfolio Life Plan. And I actually got that title from Gary Fly. He suggested that as an addition to it when he was doing a pre-read. And it's really about proactively designing what your portfolio life will be. And I have a process that takes about 6 months. I've been using for probably over 20 years with clients. And I'll just give you a brief overview of it. The first part, phase 1 of the process, is really about helping them uncover and define what are they passionate about, And I've got some really cool tools to help do that. Most people, if you say, what are you passionate about? They'll say, well, like, I love golf, but I'm not going to play golf every day in my retirement. And of course, it's not like that. It's really about going deeper and understanding what are the motivators that drive people. And so what are you passionate about? What are your favorite strengths? And I say favorite strengths with emphasis, because when people are moving into their next chapter, they don't have to use strengths that they don't enjoy using. Like, why would you say, well, I'm good at it, but I hate it? Well, then why would you use it in this next chapter? At least not proactively and intentionally. So I help them discover and own their favorite strengths. And then the third component is their lifestyle priorities. So at this point in their life and career, what's important to them? How do they want to adjust their lifestyle? And so, some things are super simple. I've had a client say, I've been waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning for the last 40 years of my life. I'd like to sleep until 6. Okay, we can build that in, stuff like that. So, so I build a picture of what those components are. And the other thing that is going on sort of behind the scenes as I'm taking them through that process is it's a process of shifting their identity. It's a process of seeing themselves in a new and different way. And so by virtue of that process, they are starting to lose the grip to the, to lose their grip to what other people, what they've been doing for their whole career in life. And then they get to a place which I kind of call the pivot point, where they build a storyline or a narrative that starts to introduce where they are and who they are at this stage of their life. And that takes them into phase 2. And it's around that time that they start to say, oh my gosh, this is really working. Like, I don't know what my portfolio life is really going to be, but I see we're making progress. Like, I see that there is an end in sight, where this will become clearer to me. And so it works them through the emotional part of this transition and the loss associated with the changes that they're making in their life. And so they get to the phase 2 of the process, and it's very intentional exploration using what I call in the book an intrigue list. So it's taking things that are intriguing to them, and I have them build a list of those kinds of things, and then using their built narrative to drive a conversation with the people that are either intriguing to them or are running organizations that are intriguing to them. And that does a couple of things. One, it directs the conversation with clear intent. Like, there's a goal and a process for these meetings. They're not networking meetings. They're not checking the box to see, like, a volume. If I meet with 100 people, I'll certainly find something meaningful for me. It's not that at all. The second thing that it does is because they are going in with the narrative or the storyline, as I call it, if somebody comes back and says, oh, like, I think all of you know, and he's given me permission to share that Tim Rice was one of my clients before he announced that he was going to be leaving the CEO role at Cone Health. And one of the things that he discovered in this process was people wanted him. Like, once they found out he was retiring, everyone's like, ooh, I want you to come work on, with me on this and work on this. Because he was prepared with his narrative and his storyline, and he could speak to that and say, I really appreciate that. Here's the things that are important to me. And I just don't think that's going to be a good fit. Whereas if you don't have that, you might say, well, I got the time, or, I should do this, or it's a worthy organization, or I volunteered before, but I don't want to volunteer in that same capacity. So you are in the power position when you go through the process this way, instead of it coming at you and you having to kind of defend or deflect or whatever.
Abby, can I ask a question here? We talk a lot about, kind of the season of life that an owner is in. And I'll give you a classic example. I've built a great relationship with a young man. I say young man, probably in his mid to late 30s, got into construction business. Long story short, started with nothing and sold it for $66 million. And so the question in his mind, and he and I've had a number of conversations, you know, I don't think he's really gotten to that whole thing, what's next, right? I mean, it's kind of an interesting approach for him, but he is going to get there. And you know, many of us have had entrepreneurial experiences where, you know, we think golf is the real thing we want to do when we get done, right? Until you play golf for 6 months and then you say to yourself, what in the heck did I do to myself? So I guess my question to you is, when you think about someone who is exiting or planning to exit that's younger, how do you change the conversation with them?
Yeah, that's a great point. And so to kind of context that, my clients used in that the clients that fit that piece of work used to be age 55 to 85. Actually, I talked to someone, a prospect that was 87. So it used to be 55 and older, and they're not just owners of businesses. I've worked with a lot of executives as well that fit that, you know, they're looking for what's next. But an interesting dynamic as the millennials have come on board, whether they're business owners or not, I'm working with more millennials that are in a position like what you're talking about. And the biggest difference between the two is, one, do they have enough money so that they don't have to be driven by making money? You know, you sell your business for 60 million, you're probably going to be fine. But I've got some owners who have sold their business for maybe 5 million and they're in their 40s, and 5 million for the next, you know, 60 years of their life may not be enough, even if they have good investment strategies with the three of you. So, so one of the differences is, from a financial standpoint, are they looking for another way to make money, or are they looking for a portfolio life plan that may or may not include that? It doesn't mean that owners in their 70s aren't going to still want to make money. They may, and that's fine. But so that's one big difference. And then some other differences are, you know, some of the length of time that they have means that they have to be engaged in a deeper way. They usually have more energy. They have their lifestyle priorities are going to look pretty different. So I modify it just a little bit, but you'd be surprised. It really ends up looking very similar.
Yeah, good, thanks.
Abby, sorry, I have to sign off because this is just the kind of conversation I'd love to be in the middle of.